Hi, I'm Sarah Sharp. I worked as a ecologist, I still do actually, but I'm mostly retired now. Do a lot of volunteer work with particularly groups like Friends of Grasslands and Conservation Council, but my main area of expertise, for what it's worth, is in grasslands and grassy woodlands in particular, so the lowland areas. Very interested in conservation of them and management of them. So I'm going to talk about sort of the more ecological side of fire now. And my paper's up here. Oh yeah, I'm sort of standing here so that you can see it. Do come up and have a look afterwards, but I'll point them out and they'll make more sense. You're a bit further away from them, they're fairly small. But the first picture I've got up here is actually taken in 1928. That's the Mildenhall collection of photographs. If you don't know them, I really recommend you have a look at them. They're absolutely fascinating to see what Canberra looked like in 1928. So basically it was before Canberra was built in most cases. Some areas were, there's certainly some areas in the north. There's a classic one of Hague Park surrounded by, with trees, the trees of Hague Park, and then surrounded by just sort of grassy land around it. But really what I wanted to show you, this is the Majura Valley and we're in the Majura Valley. What I wanted to show you in this first picture was that basically the tree line hasn't changed. And that's because this area in here is a very, very cold area. You've all been, and we might have been subject, we certainly were yesterday, to the fogs that were here. In these sorts of valleys, the temperatures are so cold at the ground level it gets down to about -11, -12, sometimes -15 degrees, actually on the ground. You get the reading at this high. There's a difference in winter of about 6 degrees between there and the ground. I was just stunned when I looked at the records years ago, which means that trees just don't grow. The reason that they grow in other valleys that are the same, like parts of Tuggeranong and in the Canberra Valley, is because the environment's so changed. So you get this natural line of grassland. If you have when you go out, if you have a look, and you'll see that all of the trees actually there's a great picture out this window. You've got it better than any pickies I've got, where you've got the grass, what would have been native grassland down here on the flats. There's the more scattered trees on the edge of the slopes, and then higher up you go into the thicker woodland and then into the forest. So it's fundamentally, it's created by the natural conditions, but at the same time it's definitely been managed over the years to retain this diversity of landscape. So it's been utilised, it's been managed, and there's as Wally says, there's absolutely undisputable. We used to think horribly that this was some kind of a pristine landscape. Well, it's far from pristine because it's been managed for many years. This next picture, interestingly, does, and you can see it out the window, show exactly the same sort of line. So this is from Mount Pleasant, both of these, the same line of woodland. But what I also wanted to show you here, who of you are Majura people? None of you? Okay, that's interesting. You may not remember in 1994 there was a wildfire that went through the defence area and the Air Services beacon, what I've always called the beacon down there, and it burnt a very, very large area down there. So that was a photo that we took after that. Ecologically, what we're trying to do is to get to some sort of a state like this. So where we have got a diversity of species and a diversity of habitat, then you have a much more robust, a much more resilient community that manages to keep itself free of weeds and things like that. So that's the sort of state that ecologically we're trying to get to. One of the things that I think is really important is that I don't think that what Wally talks about in terms of cultural burns and what we talk ecologically, I don't think they're any different. I think we want to have the same outcomes. Oh, wait a sec. And a minute or two. We want to get the same outcomes. I think what we need to do is to be bringing it together. And I'll show you some other pickies in a minute. But these are very, very dark. But basically what you often have, and if you came up this way, and I invite you to, as you go past, do you all know the beacon, the aerial beacon that's just north of the airport? It sticks out in a paddock of looks like absolute rubbish. Well, these days it actually is rubbish. It absolutely is rubbish. When I first started working there over 20 years, well over 25 years ago now, it was actually a beautiful kangaroo grass dominated area that was somewhat weedy, and now it's just crap, just because it hasn't been managed. And what happens, and it's not a good picture, have a look at this later, and that was actually from inside there. I got them to mow it one time, slash it. What had actually happened was that it got so thick with the thermida that the thermida died. These, I pulled them out and it was dead. It had killed itself. The thermida, the kangaroo grass, had killed itself. And that's what we're trying to achieve, is some sort of balance so that that doesn't happen. So instead of that, it looks like that. Where it's seeding, where there's spaces in between, where other species come through. So there's different ways of achieving that, by slashing, by grazing, and grazing of course is kangaroo grazing as well as livestock grazing. They all have different impacts and pressures and advantages. Grazing tends to be, animals will graze for more palatable plants, so you tend to lose them first. Kangaroos tend to graze mostly grasses, virtually no forbs, but they'll pick them up if they're there. Livestock, of course, provide an awful lot of compaction. I mean, I'm sure Wally would also say that this land would have been very soft underfoot, and it's not now. It's hard. It's quite compact, as well as having lost over the years masses of soil. So there's different. So then we come. I want to push on because the slashing, of course, has. Yeah, I mentioned that slashing is also has the same advantage. It takes up the top layer, but usually. And it's certainly not here because it's grazed down that much, but usually with slashing, and particularly when you've got it in where it's really, really thick, is the trash just ends up the mulch on top, and we all know what happens with mulch is that it all gets hot underneath. It can kill off things, but as it decomposes, it releases nutrients, and then so come the weeds. So you tend to get massive numbers of weeds, and slashing vehicles, of course, always spread a lot of weed seed as they go. So getting into fire, this is the same fire as this one, when we went in afterwards to have a look. Extensive areas that are burnt, no spaces, all burnt very evenly. In effect, that's not what we want. You know, that's what everyone is trying to avoid. We've been through 2003. We all know what horrifying, horrendous situation that was. So that's what happens if you get a wildfire. But wildfire is part of the natural environment, of course, because it can happen for all sorts of reasons, lightning and so on, well, as in Namadgi. I just wanted to point out one of the interesting things that was that when we went through this area, I was with a well-known reptile ecologist, Will Osborne, and we were looking at all these spider burrows, and they actually had these little lids, these little clay lids, soil lids that they were on top. And then we found the little grassland eeless dragon that this area is in here, in those spider burrows. What that actually did was that we realised that we were just talking, you know, musing what's happening, because we were really worried about this animal and how they dealt with this fire. This is a little lizard that's that long, and a very threatened species. And from that came this idea of actually putting down artificial spider tubes made of just PVC. And the animals, when they heard people coming along, would run into them, and you could actually lift the tube out and have a look at them and identify each one. You can identify each one individually by its pattern on its back. And that's where it started, by discovering those holes. So sometimes these things are fortuitous. So this is a more classic fuel reduction burn, where you're burning across a line and then you're coming back to it, so that you're burning a larger area. So this is enormous. This is, I can't remember how many, but probably in the 50, 60, 80 hectares or something like that. This one would be more in the realm of, say, 5 or 6 or 7. More and more, thank goodness, we're being able we as in the community and ecologists and the government are able to apply ecological burns. And what we mean by ecological burns, I think, is very similar to what Wally's saying, but again it's on a larger estate, because what we're trying to do is to keep patches. So we've got some trees here that have been planted, so the burn's under enough control that you retain this area. You can't see it from here, but in fact you've got patches of burnt, and patches of unburnt here, and the tree even in the area of burnt is there's still got all its leaves, even though it's a little sapling that high or a little seedling. Round here we've got a very, very old tree. This is up in Stirling Ridge, by the way. This is burns being done by the National Capital Authority. They've burnt this area down here. That's actually a path. That's a path. They've burnt slightly under the tree, but there's absolutely no damage to the tree itself. So they've raked the stuff back so that it's actually, and they've worked very hard to actually protect that tree. The fourth kind of burn is really what Wally's talking about, but this is a pretend one really. This is a brigadier. He was brigadier somebody, I can't remember, a very English yes sir, no sir guy in Tasmania who went down there, and he was demonstrating fire by just throwing out matches. So as he walked past, he'd just throw down a match and walk past, and we were all horrified. We thought the whole place would go up. But it was a very cool day. So I think in a way, it probably demonstrates this seemingly casual way of burning, but you know, these burns were just going out on the spot. So they were burning the big tussocks, but nothing else in between. And I think that's sort of probably classically what you would like to see the burns looking like. I think the only way that can happen is because that was in a very cool day, quite wet. It was damp. It wasn't wet, but it was damp. You know, the day it wasn't foggy, but the day was damp. Typical Tasmania, really. But it was fascinating what he did there. I think that just sort of the last point that I'd make, and I think when you refer to the work that Ginninderra are doing at Ginninderra Creek, is that with Ken Hodgkinson? Yeah. So I've got some of his results here actually that he provided to me, and really what he showed was that native species richness, kangaroo grass recruitment, in particular, with autumn burns were the best. Luckily that's the case because that's the only time that ACT government really will do burns. Spring burns do work quite well. Unfortunately with that is you can actually get a very high recruitment of some exotic species as well. And that's our issue. There are two issues I think in terms of, I think we would all love to get the burns that Wally's talking about, is they cost a hell of a lot of money. You know, I remember a burn that it was amazing. 30 by 50 metre area I wanted burnt. It took about 2 hours for them to prepare to burn it, and the thing burnt within 30 seconds. I looked at my watch, and then I looked at my watch, and it was finished in 30 seconds. And it was hot. It was hot. It was. It isn't this. I tried to find a photo, and I can't find my photo unfortunately. But it was a burn like this with the flames going up to higher than this ceiling. It was in grassland, and the result was amazing afterwards. Actually, extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. Was and still is. 20 years later, it's got more diversity in that little patch. I can still see where I burnt it 20 years ago. In fact, it's actually still. I should show you sometime, Wally. So that's really what I wanted to say, is that I think we need to just meld these things. But the problem is that burns are really expensive. They take a hell of a lot of preparation. And I think we have to change our whole way of doing things to achieve, you know, I think it's not just a practical thing. No, sorry, it's not a matter of saying it is a good idea, because it is the way we should be doing it. How we get there is another matter, I think.
Why are they so expensive?
Because it involves a lot of people. The sorts of fires that Wally talks about, or this thing, you can imagine that's just one person wandering around, or maybe 2 or 3. Because you still have to have someone who's ready to stamp it out. But this is stamp-outable. You know, you could put these out with your feet, with shoes on, or you know, or just a rake or something like that. You could be putting this out in. But they have 20 or 30 people. They have vehicles. They have to let everybody know. They have to let all the neighbours know. They have to plan for it. They have to fit it in with other burns.
So this is all burning on public land?
Yes, and I think it'd be interesting to look at how it's done on rural areas as well. Are you rural? Yeah, so do you burn?
Not yet.
Yeah, because I just don't know enough about how you actually can achieve that in a rural setting.
Very spontaneous, doesn't it?
Sorry?
It needs to be very spontaneous, as in when the timing is right, when the dew is right.
Yep.
And you can just have a little cool burn.
Yep.
You know, most of these things, when they're pre-organised,
Yes.
the conditions aren't
No, they might not be right on the day.
optimal, but they still have to go ahead because the overhead in organising, the bureaucracy, as Wally says, kills
Yeah.
them. You know, blackfellas wouldn't have done that. They would have just gone lit a fire when the time was right, and they wouldn't have.
But partly is because that fire can easily turn into that fire when it hasn't been burnt for a long time.
Yeah. So that's
That's what you are always catering for. That's the way they all work, is that the potential for that to happen, and that's loss of stock, it's loss of wildlife, it's loss of production. You know, there's lots of things that go with that.
So until you know an awful lot about it, you can't handle it so well. So that's a knowledge, a fire knowledge, like riding a bicycle or riding a
It's
horse or something.
yeah.
When you're very skilled, you can do phenomenal things.
And a lot of practice and a lot of learning. I mean, actually, to get to even this point, there's a lot of skill in that.
Yeah.
There's a hell of a lot of skill in
So
that,
that's it.
and there's a hell of a lot of care in that to achieve those outcomes. And that's what we need to do. So I think that it needs to all come and meld together. And yeah, that's.
It'd be great to be able to get have a consultative body where you can get someone to come to your land and help advise. It's a lot of knowledge a lot of ancient wisdom to kind of pull together and walk around the place with the matches. It's
We'll
sort
form
of
a
like
team, Wally. How about that?
Yeah, we're looking at doing that.
form a consultation
Because
team.
there has been trial cultural burns done through another Aboriginal man called Rod Mason, and he's been doing those up Coomerline with the property owners up there, and they're actually getting a lot of benefit out of that at the moment.
Sounds like
And he's
a very good
fascinating,
idea.
and he demonstrates it on the ground, and I've seen his demonstrations, and we exactly did. We went out on a very cool morning quite early and just burned a really small area and moved the material away from underneath the trees.
There's a lot of preparation that you need to do as well, like with a cultural burn as well. It's not just the practice that fire management undertake. They're sort of learning some of those things from us as well, because they've learned that with their burns they're also damaging trees and things like that, you know, and they take a lot to regenerate sort of thing as well after a fire. You can see a lot of examples of that where some of the burns that have been done, you can see new growth and all that sort of thing's been damaged really severely, and that's just not going to grow at all now. So those are the sort of things that, like, you know, with Rod Mason, for instance, that he shows how to prepare an area for burn. That's if it's been left for a long time, and that's what you got to do.
It's different in grasslands, but you can see the damage. I think it is, yeah. But you can see the damage that occurs when you've got a large burn where you have to get your vehicles in, and they'll grade lines if they have to. But grasslands is simple because it's herbaceous material, so it's when it burns, it regenerates really well. And again, it was someone else's photo that I was trying to find, but I couldn't. These are old scans, most of these, the old days. Old slides that I had to scan. But the regrowth after this, the diversity was phenomenal. I mean, again, grasslands are a system that commonly you'll find 100 or so species in a grassland out at the in the defence area, the Majura field, what I call the field firing range, but they call it something else now, but just down here. The diversity is phenomenal out there. It just needs to go from that to something like that, or that without the trees. These are all natives that are in native forms that are in there. That's what we want to achieve, and I think that's what we all want to achieve. Yep. Okay. Thanks.